Awareness, the final frontier. These are the explorations of Jonathan Robinson and Brian Tom O'Connor. Their continuing mission, to discover fresh new paths to the mystery within, to seek out new joys and new methods of awakening, to boldly go into the heart of expanded consciousness. This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, fellow explorers, to Awareness Explorers. I'm Jonathan Robinson, your co-host, and I am with my trusty co-host and friend,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
And woohoo, it's a new year, and it's our 100th episode. We are thrilled to have 100 episodes. We're grateful to all our listeners and all our Patreon supporters, and anyone who's trying to work on themselves to reach higher states of consciousness. I do just want to mention that if you're interested in getting extra guided meditations and extra things from our guests and blogs and such, you can go to patreon.com/awareness explorers, and you'll see for as little as $1 a month or more, you can get all these extra goodies, and it is all described on that page. Thank you to our Patreon supporters, because you make this possible, and to all our supporters, because we don't like just talking to ourselves, although in a certain way, that's always what we're doing to our bigger self. But with 100 episodes, there's a lot of stuff we've covered. And in this episode, we plan to do two things. One is talk about some of the greatest hits of Awareness Explorers, things that keep coming up over and over again as Brian and I explore things with each other and our guests. And also, we put out that we were going to answer your questions during this episode, which we will also do. We got a list of great questions from various people, and we will do our best to answer them in the second half of this episode. So as you think about 100 episodes, Brian, what stands out to you that may have surprised you or may have thought, wow, I didn't really expect that, but now that we've done 100 episodes, I see X keeps coming up?
Well, first of all, when we started, we weren't even planning to have guests at all. It started out as just the two of us gabbing with each other about awareness, and I still enjoy those episodes immensely, and I love talking to you about it. So what sticks to me is how much I enjoy our interaction, how much I enjoy our give and take, even though often sometimes we disagree. Initially, it was about the two-wing analogy, where one wing being sort of working on yourself and one wing being more self-realization as pure awareness. And you have often convinced me that both wings are necessary to have a well-rounded life. And yet, at the same time, I feel so devoted to the idea of realizing who you really are, which is not your body and your mind and your personality as primary importance. And fixing what's wrong with you has always seemed less important to me.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because, the two-wing analogy comes from, if you have a plane and one wing is very strong and one wing is very weak, you'll go around in circles and eventually crash. And I think we both have been good at convincing each other about the importance of the wing that we both represent a little bit more. So you have convinced me that, it really comes down to, are you spending time in pure awareness? Or do you know your true nature? How much are you doing that? Because that ability improves everything immediately.
Right.
And then hopefully to some extent, I've convinced you that, you want to also work on your psychology. You want to work on your body. You want to work on your interactions with people, because if you don't, you can have a pretty messy life, or you can be a jerk, even though you're highly awake. That can happen. So they can work together really well. And usually people can guess which wing is weaker for them. And my conclusion is that it's always good to focus a little bit on the wing that's a little bit weaker, so you're more balanced.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because, and even though I totally get all that you said, and it's all true, um, I've always felt you don't focus on the wing that's weaker. You focus, I mean, I've never thought focusing on your weaknesses was a good strategy. I always thought focusing on your strengths was the better strategy.
Yeah. And one of the things that makes our podcast alive is that we're both brilliant and often disagree with each other.
Yes. And we both have strengths and weaknesses.
And we both are not as humble as I would like. Anyway. And we both have strengths and weaknesses. Yeah, absolutely.
But the second thing I mentioned when you asked that was that I never thought we were going to have guests. And I remember our first guest, which I feel so honored that he was our first guest, was Rupert Spira. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true.
And I remember going to a talk he was giving here in New York at the Open Center and handing him a letter from you, inviting him, and him saying, well, you know, I get so many of these, I probably won't say yes, but I'll give it to my assistant. And then lo and behold, we got a message saying he wanted to be on it. And I was just so thrilled.
Yeah. Yeah. And since then, we've kind of been able to interview anybody we want, pretty much. Deepak Chopra, Byron Katie, Jeffrey Martin, Fred Davis, you know, all these great people and many more who are not necessarily as well known, but their insights have been amazing. Something that's come up a lot, in my opinion, as I thought about our episodes, is that there's many different forms of inquiry, you know, and with that, there's a lot of different methods to awaken, and we don't know what's best for an individual person. That's why we've been committed to exploring different ideas and hoping that something lands on a person. And you've been so good at coming up with all these different methods too, that you got to try it out and see what works for you. There is no one path to awakening, enlightenment, or even happiness. And that's been really clear as we've gone into many different explorations.
Yes, that's right. I think that really is key. And even something that you tried yesterday may not work today. But it brings me to, I think, probably one of my biggest insights over these few years is that the idea that we do these methods to achieve a state, a particular state that we would like to be in, or to get rid of any particular state that we don't want to be in, but we're in, that alone is an obstacle. So yes, we have a lot of these methods, but it's very important not to think of these methods as trying to get somewhere or get something, but it's actually totally the opposite. It's looking at what's already there and realizing that your idea of something that's going to happen to you in the future is actually kind of a veil disguising the joy and true happiness of your true nature that's already there.
Yeah. And it's important to hear that over and over again, because in our society or our culture or culture, we are taught over and over again something very different than that. And there's just so many ways to go into this idea that enlightenment or awakening is something that happens far in the future, and it's only now. There's only now. Now is it. Now is the end of the story. And hopefully we have drilled that into ourselves and our listeners enough that maybe that's becoming real.
Maybe.
And there's so many other obstacles too. You know, there's our conditioning. You know, one way of looking at awakening is doing the direct path of just enter more fully into now without resistance, and pure awareness can be there. But there's so many obstacles in the way, and you can get lost in looking at the obstacles, or you can recondition yourself so that you're not so triggered by all your obstacles. And we've talked a lot about that.
That's right. And it really is. I mean, when you're less triggered, you do lead a more peaceful life. And that's really great. But at the same time, when you're triggered, who's triggered? It's that individual personality, body, mind, ego that's triggered. It's not the real you. The real you is that pure, clear, open space that notices that this person known as Brian or this person known as Jonathan is triggered at the moment. And even when you're triggered, and even when you have an emotion that you don't want, and even when your mind is busy, that true nature of pure awareness is there. You don't have to create it. You just have to notice it.
Right, right.
And I do sound like a broken record, so I apologize. I keep coming back to this over and over again, but I just so deeply believe it. And the paradox of the whole thing is that I say it, this is not about creating a state. It's not about, because if I sit down and I said, yesterday I meditated and it made me really joyful, I want to create that joy again, it doesn't work. And when I say, okay, I'm totally okay with the fact that I feel crappy right now, then the joy floods in. And that's the paradox.
Yeah.
You stop trying to get to that state, somehow that state arises. It's hard to explain, but it seems true.
Yeah, and I still get caught in that, the idea of I will do this so that I can get somewhere else. And your frequent reminders have been useful for me. I hope they're useful for our guests as well. Something that I wrote an article, and I think I sent it to our Patreon supporters, about how spirituality is changing. And we don't think of it as, like our computers change, our technology changes, but spirituality changes as well. And it has entered into the information age where it's changing really quick. And something I've seen in talking to a lot of well-known teachers is that they are saying different things than they did 25 years ago. If you remember, 25 years ago, I edited a book called The Experience of God, where I interviewed everybody from Mother Teresa to the Dalai Lama and anybody you had known. And the answers are totally different than when we ask people questions now. And to me, that means that something is advancing, that there's more agreement now as to what people need to do and what people need to not do to grow spiritually. And I think that's a good thing. Like, for example, there's less emphasis on like just shutting off your inner dialogue. We've agreed that's friggin' impossible. But there is agreement that you can change your relationship with your inner dialogue or change your relationship with your emotions, which was the subject of our last episode. There's agreement that working on trauma sometimes is useful because if you awaken, you still have all this trauma, that can be a problem. But I'm wondering what has struck you in terms of how things are coalescing or how things have changed since you have entered the path.
Well, the thing that's changed the most that I've noticed out there, because when I first started with this, when I first started looking into spirituality, and the only reason I was doing it was because I was depressed and I thought it might help with that. Mm-hmm. The only reason I started looking into it, and I tried a few things that didn't seem to be working, but when I stumbled upon non-duality and contemporary teachers and the classic teachers from last century, I kind of stuck with that. So that for me hasn't changed that much over the years. Just that very early period when I tried a whole bunch of stuff that didn't work, and then I found one that worked for me and stuck with it. But what I have noticed is that idea, that the non-dual perspective has boomed in terms of how many other teachers there are talking about it.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I used to read books because I was hoping to get something from them. And I no longer feel I need to get anything from a book, but I still read them because I'm so curious about how other people put the same thing in different words. Mm-hmm. And I really, really enjoy that. And And I admire so many other teachers and writers on this subject.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly been a boom in non-duality, and there's also been a boom in what I would call somatic awakening, very much going into the body and using the body as a vehicle of awakening rather than seeing it as an obstacle to awakening. Going deeper into sensations, going deeper into just being present fully in your body. We talked about, Judith Blackstone, the realization process, and John Prendergast. Those are becoming more and more popular because they're very embodied and they work. And I think they have a lot of other advantages. We live in bodies, so you can't just kind of pretend they're not there.
I agree with you wholeheartedly that you're right. I think that is one of the major shifts, and it's really important. And it's something that, I ignored initially and discovered, wow, the best way to get out of my head is to notice what's happening in my body. And and that simple realization really was huge.
It was huge for me too, because we're both pretty intellectual. I'm sure our listeners haven't gotten a clue about that, but the fact that I can feel my heart, I feel my gut, or feel my entire body is like, you're awakening to a new part of you, and that's exciting. That's an exploration, and that it like opens up new possibilities as you become more than a walking head, or a talking head. You open up into a new world, and that's really exciting as we practice those things and experience that.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing about the body is that it really holds a lot of tensions. There's clutching that happens, and it's ancient and it's been there so long, sometimes we don't even notice it. And one of the three things that I've noticed that are absolutely important in recognition of your nature, number one is simply relaxing. In other words, finding out where inside you're clutching against experience and let it go. Let go of that. And that most of that happens in parts of your body that are sort of being held. And when you let go of that, things flow through you. Things like emotions flow through you and then leave. They don't stick around. And the second thing about it is that, yes, we're both pretty analytical, and I've always been analytical, and I started this by figuring it out. And figuring it out is important only to figure out where to start looking. But once you start looking, figuring out is now useless. You must look inside, drop below the neck into your heart area, or drop back into the background of awareness and be that. Experience what it feels like to be that, and not analyze it and not figure it out, because the intellect is the wrong tool. It's a useful tool, but it's the tool of separation. It's the tool of making distinctions between things, and it can't be used for understanding the unity of all things.
Well said. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Now, one last thing I think that stands out for me is what you said about relaxation, which is really a letting go of constrictions of mind, letting go of constrictions of body, letting go of constrictions of beliefs, letting go of constrictions around certain feelings. And, we don't have a school for letting go. I'd love there to be a school called the School of Letting Go. And, life is doing its part. It's sending us a bunch of stuff that we could try to let go of, and it also previews that eventually we have to let go of all our friends and family and our body. So it's a good school to start that process with. And the techniques we talk about are primarily letting go techniques, because our true nature is always there. It doesn't go somewhere. What goes somewhere is us, and our obstacles that take us into all kinds of stories and beliefs and dramas. And really, what we're here to do is learn to let go of a lot of that stuff so that we can be more present.
Yeah, beautifully put.
So I think that's the 20-minute version of some of our favorite topics and observations. But I know we have a lot of questions that our listeners sent us, and you and I are going to try and tackle some of these questions just as a way of serving our listeners. And thank you for sending us your questions. So what's one of the first questions, Brian?
Well, just first of all, I wanted to say I'm going to go through the questions in the order that we received them in case we run out of time. I want, the people who got to us first will get their questions asked. And second of all, I want to thank everybody who did send questions. I'm so grateful to you. So our first question is from Sharon, and she asks, what's the best way to deal with pain in terms of getting past it to awareness?
I'll give a shot at that. Ajay Shanti said some stuff about that. And I had severe back pain for about 2 years. And the mind and the stories that the mind creates are of no help whatsoever, unless they get you to a better practitioner who can help you. So it's really a matter of, can you feel the sensations and let them be as they are, give them space, and not create a future-oriented story, a poor me story, more than you have to. And it's a real challenge. I really feel for people in that situation. A lot of people are in that situation. And I would encourage people in that situation to also keep trying different things, because eventually I did try something that did help. But most pain is not all the time. It comes in and comes and goes. So if you can relax with the uncomfortable sensations and not constrict around them in your mind and body, that can sometimes help.
Thank you. Yeah. Next question is from Lisa. And I actually did a quick response to Lisa in this over email, but I also want to hear what Jonathan has to say about it. And Lisa says, I have realized only minds can join, and now the physical does not matter much to me as it did. I still want companionship, but how does one have a relationship with that mindset? The other person might not understand. LOL.
Uh-huh.
And I thought that was really interesting. And I had a quick thought about it, which was that I don't think that the other person in a relationship has to have an understanding of non-dual or any kind of spirituality. But if you just allow them to be as they are, they tend to blossom in the relationship. And, but I'm curious to see, Jonathan, you're pretty much kind of a relationship expert. I'm curious what you have to say about this.
Well, we tend to think that we have to get all our needs met from one person, or that person has to fulfill every part of us. And I don't subscribe to that idea or belief. So my wife doesn't do the type of spirituality I do at all. And that's fine. We connect on many levels. We don't have to connect 100% on every level. So I know partners who are very deep into spirituality, and they're or people who are very deep into spirituality, and their partners aren't into it at all, but they connect over sex, they connect over the children, they connect over politics, they connect over many other things. So that's one thing I would say. And you just never know. I asked a friend of mine who's very awake how she does relationships, because she doesn't even think of herself as existing as a person. I said, how's that work? And she said, it's sometimes difficult for their partners, but everybody appreciates love and being loved. So if you can show your kindness and love towards anyone, you see who tends to hang around, even if they're not into the same ideas and beliefs as you, and enjoy that. And we don't have to, one of the advantages of being more spiritually awake is you don't have to get all your needs met from this one person, because you're getting a lot of your needs met just from being with your true nature. And I think our models of monogamy and that everything has to be connected are outdated and can be reviewed, and you can create it however you want.
That's a great answer. And I want to expand on that a little bit on two of the points you made. The last one being love. Yes, that's the most important thing. In fact, it's the answer to everything. When in doubt, love.
Mm-hmm. Keeps it simple.
Yeah. And if you don't feel loving, notice that that's just the temporary personality that doesn't feel loving. Your true nature is already loving. There's
Mm-hmm.
something in you that's already loving that you're not noticing. So go to love. Go to love. And the second thing is kind of a variation on what you described. And I learned this from Ajay, who talked about it a lot in his relationship with his wife Mukti, which is that they both realized that their happiness is not dependent upon the other person.
Right.
So if you're in a relationship to get your happiness from the other person, then that's a recipe for probably a tough time in the relationship. But if you know that your happiness is to be found within you and not from the other person, then you find that within you and you share it.
And that's one of the advantages of being on the path of awakening.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Next question.
Okay, this is from Ajay, and he actually has a couple questions here, which are good. And the first one is, should you give in to your desires, or are they a hindrance in the spiritual process?
You take that one, Brian.
Well, desires are a really complicated thing, and we all know that in Buddhism, they talk about desire as one of the primary obstacles. I look upon desire as something that is natural in our human bodies and minds. But when we realize that the fulfillment of these desires isn't what causes happiness, that's the key insight. For example, and this is a classic example, you really want a new car.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel totally unhappy because you don't have a new car. And then you get a new car and you feel really happy. And then, of course, a month later, you're no longer happy because that's worn off. And the thing to realize is that your happiness didn't come from getting the new car. It came from the fact that temporarily you were no longer desiring the new car. So it's desiring that, it's the desiring that puts you in the future and away from the now. And in that way, they're a hindrance. But we also have to, at the same time, understand that it is natural that humans desire. And to be desire-free might also be some sort of future state that's going to be a hindrance.
Right. Something that I can add to that is that sometimes the best way to overcome your desire for something is to get it and then see, oh, yeah, that wasn't so great. Or, yeah, okay, that's what a relationship is. I really want a relationship. And then you get a relationship and you think, well, that you pay a price for that as well, or money or whatever it is, that you don't crave something so much because you got it and you saw that it didn't totally do it for you.
Right. Ajay's second question is about God and prayer. And he says, visualizing a picture of God helping you when you are stressed. Could this be an effective technique? And I had some thoughts about that, but if you want to go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think it can be, depending on what you're trying to solve. I think that imagining a picture of God can help some people feel hope, feel confident. But in a way, it's very much a psychological method, very much like having an imaginary friend might help soothe a fearful child. But I think for me, the experience that has been more effective was not having an image of God as a separate entity outside of myself. That didn't seem to help for me, although other people it may, and I don't want to take it away from anyone. For me, it was the idea that of looking within, of if there is only one thing going on in the universe, if it is only energy arising and falling in temporary forms, then who else is looking out through my eyes right now other than the universe, which is my definition of God? So if I want to look for God, I look inside and see what is noticing my experience, and then imagine, what if it's the same? What if it's not just some little thing inside me, but it's actually everybody looking out everyone's eyes simultaneously? That's where I would look.
Uh-huh. Well, I get to disagree with you, and I always love disagreeing with you because we agree on so much, and we need some conflict. So my view of this is that everybody is at a different place and they need different things. Do what works for you, and try different stuff. And for a while, I thought of God as, outside of me, and I would pray to God, and that worked at that time. And now I'm doing something different. So try stuff and listen for what seems to resonate for you. And that's the bottom line as far as I'm concerned.
Well, actually, I don't disagree with you that if visualizing a picture of God helps you when you are stressed, I wouldn't tell you not to do that anymore.
Yeah.
If it helps you when you're stressed, fine. But at the same time, every once in a while, try looking inside for it. And I love the idea in some religions that you cannot picture God, that any image of what it is cannot be true because it is simply an object that's noticed in consciousness or in awareness, and God is universal consciousness or universal awareness. Now, I don't think that you have to actually believe that's true in order for it to be helpful to you. You could say, let me try it on. What if this were true? And play with it. Play with it like you play with a toy, or you take something apart to see how it works. See if it works. If it doesn't, try something else. If what works for you makes you feel good and happy and peaceful and friendly and joyous, go with that.
Good. And the next one.
All righty. Spencer says, I'm wondering what your current favorite short phrase is that you use to center or ground yourself. Mine is, it is what it is. I love its deep, radical acceptance and simplicity. I remember being fascinated with this statement as a child and not even understanding its true meaning.
I recently wrote a song that has a lyric, it is what it is, and if you know what's what, you'll say that's that and avoid a rut.
But you're so great at these short phrases, many of which I've learned and taken on and tried out. What are some of yours?
Well, for overcoming my judgmental mind, my favorite phrase right now is they are a perfect them. And I was watching the show Cobra Kai yesterday, in which they have this really bad guy on it, and the actor's great, and he plays a really bad guy. And I was thinking, wow, that guy really plays a bad guy well. And sometimes when I see somebody who's being a jerk or a politician I don't like, I'll think they're being a perfect them, so I'm no longer resisting them. And I can actually appreciate them, even though I don't like what they're doing. And that has helped me. But my main phrase I'm using now in normal life is simply, thank you for this. And it could be in this moment, thank you for this podcast. Thank you for this question. It could be, when something last week, we didn't have electricity for 5 days. And I would use the phrase, thank you for this. Thank you for, first of all, the fact that I'm surviving without the electricity. Thank you for the fact that this wakes me up to how wonderful electricity is. And it might be, thank you for this current emotion. And that lack of resistance and that appreciation helps me to let go of resistance and helps me to be more present.
Yeah, I think that's great. And very similar to Spencer's phrase, it is what it is one of my favorites, which is, why shouldn't it be?
Uh-huh.
Why shouldn't this be happening? Or why should it be the way I think it should be? I think that that's a really key phrase. And I also think that other really short phrases are several variations on self-inquiry. The most famous one is, who am I? But that doesn't always do it for everybody. So find a variation that works for you. Like, what is this me? Or what is experiencing this?
Or the one I'm using now in that way, because the who am I hasn't worked for me. I say, can I now see through the Jonathan character?
Right. Yes, that's a good one. Or what knows my experience?
That's a good one.
What knows my experience? Or what is this happening in? But I think that, for me, going with just simply I started with that, and I've never left that. I've looked for variations on it, but looking, what is this I? Or another one is, what has never changed ever since I was a little kid?
Mm-hmm. And you just got to find one or two that work for you.
That's right. Exactly. Alrighty, Joshua has a couple questions. And the first one is, do you guys believe in reincarnation? Like, do you think we live over and over again until we finally get it right and then move on to join the cosmos?
I've read some research of indications of that, but I think the way we think of reincarnation is too simplified. Do our bodies reincarnate? Well, they do go into the ground and then they become something else. So, that's one way of looking at it. I think that it's more important to ask yourself, what would be more useful belief? Because we don't know, and it's probably more complicated than our simple, yes, there's reincarnation, or no, there isn't. So what would be a useful way of you thinking about it? And if the idea of our soul learning lessons and reincarnating over and over again is useful for you, then I'd say, then you should take on that belief. I do think that there is something that survives death, but it's not exactly what you might consider you.
Yes, I think so too. And I think one of the great analogies is the whirlpool analogy in a stream.
Mm-hmm.
that we're temporary whirlpools in a stream. We're made of water just like the rest of the stream. And when that whirlpool fades away or dies down, there's still a little motion left in the water, left over from the circular motion of that whirlpool that might interact with some other whirlpool. And personally, I find that more compelling than the reincarnation idea. But every once in a while, I find the reincarnation idea somehow comforting, even though I don't really believe in it. Every once in a while, I find myself thinking, wow, in the next life, such and such. And because I don't really believe that there is that there is a separate entity that's separate from everything else that's somehow going to survive. I don't really subscribe to it, but on the other hand, every once in a while, It's a nice thought. And imagination is actually really important. More important than whether something is true or not.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Joshua's second question is, I was also wondering if an enlightened person will admit they are enlightened, or will they not say so because this is being prideful? I wouldn't. I wouldn't, for fear somebody will say, oh, he thinks he's enlightened. But
yeah,
also,
I don't have
go
a
ahead.
comment on that one. I think different people do different things. There is no one enlightened people do this.
I've never judged a person because they claim to be enlightened. I only ascertained whether I thought they were telling the truth or not. But more important to me is the idea that enlightenment is a continuous state that you're going to achieve in the future. And something happened to me where I just simply lost that concept. And instead, it seems to me something that is available, something that's there right now, that doesn't arrive sometime in the future, but that's already there, that I can notice and that I can dip into. And I've said this 100 times, so pardon me saying it again, my favorite analogy of the infinitely refillable water bottle. You've got this, you carry it around with you, and you can drink from that joy of pure awareness anytime you feel like it. But you don't have to walk around with a bottle to your lips 24/7.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Doug asks, I've heard more than one spiritual teacher suggest that intellectual knowledge about awakening or study of the Vedas can sometimes block or delay the direct experience of awakening. Indeed, there are cases of people who have no spiritual practice or spiritual interest who awaken spontaneously. So does mental knowledge of or focus on spiritual awakening have the effect of blocking spontaneous shift of awakening?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Fred Davis talks about this a lot, and one of our guests. I think that a little bit of knowledge can be useful if it points you to practice and points you to the limits of the mind. And that I do see some people, they just get very involved in the intellectual idea of awakening and they miss the experience. So I think it depends on the individual, but that is a danger, that you can have too much knowledge and not enough experience. And that, like the two wings analogy, if you have a very strong wing of knowledge, you want to have a very strong wing of experience to balance it out. And so that's how I look at it. Your thoughts on that?
I agree with you in that they are pointers, and you can use them to understand the pointer. I mean, read Upanishads. There's great wisdom there. But becoming a scholar of the Upanishads isn't what's going to waken you up. Isn't what's going to awaken you. What's going to awaken you is realizing what it's pointing to and seeing if you can experience that. In other words, if you can be that, because the truth of awareness is not something you can see. It is only something you can be. And so the two great analogies here are classic, the finger pointing to the moon. If you're involved in the finger, you're looking in the wrong place, but the finger was very useful to point to the moon. Look at the moon. The other is the raft that you use to cross the river. You cross the river, but when you get to the other side, you don't carry the raft with you as you walk across the land.
Good analogies.
Debra asks, as we round the corner into 2022, I'd like to know what action or event had the biggest positive impact on you in 2021. What are some of the questions you are contemplating for your own development this year?
Oh boy, great questions. And it's a great question for everybody to ask themselves as you start a new year. Off the top of my head, something I've seen is the power of kindness. There's so little kindness in the world that I've been asking myself, how can I be kind to the people around me? And my surprise is that it's been a great joy as I've been doing that. And of course, the people around me kind of like it too. So I think in a world with so much suffering and so much hardship, that being a vehicle for that kindness, which happens as you dive in and drink of your true nature, is a great focus to have.
Yes, I agree. For me, it was actually a conversation with with you, Jonathan, that I had once, not during the podcast, but in one of our planning sessions. And I will never forget this. I was talking about how the idea of getting something you don't have was an obstacle, and I found myself just laughing uncontrollably at that.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't really analyzing it at the moment. It just, for some reason, something dropped at that moment. Something fell away, and just laughter poured forth. And I'll never forget that. And so that had a big positive impact on me through the whole year, and which led me to think, well, I'm not really going to try and get anything in the coming year. I'm just going to see if I can continue to live that insight.
A good reminder for us all. So in the last few minutes, let's try to answer a couple questions quickly, just so everybody feels like they got their question answered if we can.
Well, I believe there's only one more right now, which is again from Sharon, who sent a second question. And she said, what do you guys think of the Course in Miracles as a tool for awareness? In other words, would the Course in Miracles count as a tool or as a religion? Seems to have very specific meditative practices and a non-dual basis.
Yeah, I lived in a Course in Miracles commune for 2 years, and I did the course. Once again, people are at different levels and different needs when it comes to their spiritual next step. And if you read the course and it speaks to you and you do the practices, then it's going to be very effective. And if you read the course and it doesn't speak to you and you don't do the practices, it's not going to be effective. And whether it be Course in Miracles or Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism, they all have religious aspects and they all have practice aspects. And so you can go down the religion path, which I think tends not to be that helpful, or you can go down the practice path that they're pointing to and hopefully experience a higher state of consciousness and more of your true natures. So if the Course in Miracles speaks to you and you like the practices, it's going to take you pretty far.
Yeah, and I'd like to read something that actually responded to Sharon about, because I think the Course in Miracles is absolutely fascinating, and yes, it is very, very non-dual. It's so different from the religions that focus on the external God as opposed to the internal God, and the separation between us and God as opposed to the union, the universality of all things. But for me, just my own personal tastes, I found A Course in Miracles to be a little long and complex. And although I've gained a lot of insights from it, to me, the realization is so utterly simple. We are the universe, or God, if you prefer, looking out of our eyes and all eyes simultaneously. And when we turn our attention around and within and be that knowingly, the joy of that can come flooding through from the universal to the individual. So I love A Course in Miracles. I think it's great, but know that I think the truth is so simple.
It's easy to lose the simple. So you said we made it through all the questions.
We did make it through all the questions, at least, unless
fantastic.
I missed some. And if anyone has sent a question after we recorded this, I apologize for not getting your question in.
Right. And in looking back in our 100 episodes, I just want to thank all our great guest explorers, and we're going to have many more guest explorers in the upcoming year. Some people I'm very excited about. And, I've noticed that sometimes a guest explorer will just say a sentence or something that just whaps me on the head and helps me to see things differently. Like one example is Fred Davis said, in a room, there's a lot of space, but it's not really empty space. You think of it as the glue that holds everything together. And I started to see that, space is really a thing. Or Deepak Chopra said, you're not a person with a body, you're awareness that is temporarily experiencing a body. These little phrases sometimes can make a big difference. And Lion Goodman said, beliefs are things that you can try on and try and take off like clothes. They don't need to be permanently attached to you. So sometimes it just takes a phrase or something somebody says or something Brian and I say, and you can really go with it, and it can make a difference in your life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And all those memories are great. And the one takeaway from our guests that I wanted to mention is that even apart from the content of what they say, I found the experience of listening to them and opening to their, for lack of a better word, spiritual energy, to be really effective. I mean, in other words, when I stop trying to judge or figure out or understand and just say, okay, I'm just going to be open to what this person has to say and let it flow into me, then the experience of love and joy and connection is just right there.
I'm glad you said that. It's so true. And it's a blessing to be around this information, people passing it on, people who teach it. And we are grateful that we get to do that as well.
Well, I'm grateful to you, Jonathan, because it was your brilliant idea to have this podcast in the very beginning.
Well, thank you, Brian. And you do most of the work, so I'm grateful to you. And please tell your friends and family about it. And we're not doing a meditation this time because we have about 90 of them on our website. And we wanted to explore a lot of these ideas. But feel free to go to our website, download any of those meditations. And I find that they're very helpful, not just the ones you and I do, but the ones our guests do. I think that's a real resource that can add a lot of peace to anyone's life.
Yep.
Any last words of our 100th episode, Mr. O'Connor?
Just to thank you.
And keep exploring.
Keep exploring. Oh, that's 4. Thank you, and keep exploring.
Okay.
Keep coming back. Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.